Google is being sued by the US government in 2 separate antitrust cases simultaneously. Apple is fighting the Department of Justice in federal court and losing. Amazon has a blockbuster FTC trial scheduled for later this year. Microsoft is under investigation for using its cloud dominance to kill competition in artificial intelligence. Meta is being appealed after narrowly escaping a breakup ruling. And the European Union is fining these companies billions of dollars and threatening to restructure how they operate entirely. All of this is happening right now in 2026 at the same time. And the reason big tech is genuinely terrified, not just annoyed, not just spending on lawyers, but existentially afraid, is not because any single one of these cases is going badly. It is because, for the first time in 30 years, the entire system that allowed these companies to become the most powerful corporations in human history is being taken apart piece by piece, simultaneously, by governments on both sides of the Atlantic, who have finally decided they are not going to wait any longer. To understand why this moment is so different from everything that came before, you need to understand the deal that Silicon Valley made with the world for the past 3 decades. The deal was simple. Let us move fast. Let us acquire competitors. Let us lock users into our ecosystems. Let us collect unlimited data. Let us make ourselves the default option for everything. And in exchange, we will give you free search, free email, free social media, cheap e-commerce, and the most powerful devices ever built. The world took the deal. Regulators looked the other way. Politicians accepted campaign contributions and delivered speeches about innovation, and the companies got so large that by the time anyone seriously started asking whether the deal was fair, the companies had already become too embedded in daily life to simply unwind. That era is over. The transition point happened somewhere between 2020 and 2026, and it did not come from one single event. It came from an accumulation. The Cambridge Analytica scandal showing the world what Meta's data collection actually enabled. The COVID pandemic exposing how completely dependent the global economy had become on a handful of tech platforms. The rise of generative AI creating a new race for dominance that regulators recognized they needed to get ahead of before it was too late, and a growing bipartisan political consensus in the United States. Rare and uncomfortable but real. That the tech giants had gotten too big to be good for competition, for democracy, or for the basic functioning of markets. Start with Google because the Google story is the one that signals most clearly how far things have moved. In August 2024, a federal judge ruled that Google had illegally monopolized the U.S. search market in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. This was not a regulatory warning or a civil complaint. This was a federal court finding that the company had broken the law, the same law used to break up Standard Oil in 1911 and AT&T in 1984. The specific mechanism Google used was simple and devastating. The company paid $26.3 billion in a single year, 2021 alone, to make itself the default search engine on virtually every device sold in the United States. Apple got a cut. Samsung got a cut. Every major browser and device manufacturer took the money and pointed their users at Google. Google held 90% of the U.S. search market as a result, and the judge ruled that this dominance was not the result of being the best product. It was the result of paying to eliminate meaningful competition. In September 2025, the court issued its remedies ruling. The judge banned Google's exclusive default agreements, the contracts that turned billions of dollars into guaranteed search market share. Google was ordered to allow competitors access to its search and advertising infrastructure. A technical committee was established to enforce the judgment for 6 years, but the judge stopped short of ordering Google to break up. He declined to force the sale of Chrome or Android. The DOJ was furious. On February 4, 2026, the Department of Justice and 38 state attorneys general filed a formal appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, calling the remedies a slap on the wrist for a recidivist monopolist. They want Chrome divested. They want Android separated. Morgan Stanley analysts estimated in early 2026 that mandatory choice screens alone, requiring users to pick their search engine rather than defaulting to Google, could cost Google between $15 and $25 billion in annual advertising revenue. A Chrome sale could be more disruptive still, removing Google's ability to channel 3.4 billion Chrome users directly to its search results. But Google's search case is only half the story. Simultaneously, there's a second antitrust case moving against Google's advertising technology business, the infrastructure that powers the buying and selling of digital ads across the entire internet. Google operates on all 3 sides of that market at once. It runs the tools that advertisers use to buy ads. It runs the tools that publishers use to sell ad space on their websites. And it runs the exchange in the middle that matches buyers and sellers and takes a cut of every transaction. The DOJ compared this to a stock exchange that also runs the broker desks for every single trade on both sides. The remedies in this case, potentially including the forced sale of Google's ad exchange, would be the most significant forced breakup of an American company since AT&T was dismantled in 1984. The European Union has already fined Google 2.95 billion euros for exactly this conduct. The US case is moving toward a remedies ruling that could restructure the entire digital advertising market. Now look at Apple, because the Apple situation reveals a different kind of fear. Apple is not primarily an advertising company. It is an ecosystem company. Its entire business model depends on the iPhone being the entry point to a closed, controlled world, where Apple takes a cut of virtually every transaction. The App Store alone generates tens of billions of dollars a year. Apple charges developers a commission of up to 30% on every purchase made through an iOS app, enforces a rule preventing developers from directing users to cheaper purchases outside the App Store, and prohibits competing payment systems on its platform. In December 2025, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Apple had committed civil contempt by willfully violating court orders that came out of the Epic Games case. It had imposed a 27% commission on external purchases and restricted alternative payment options in direct defiance of a court injunction. That is not losing an antitrust argument. That is a court saying Apple knowingly and deliberately broke the law even after being told not to. At the same time, the Department of Justice filed its own separate antitrust lawsuit against Apple in March 2024, targeting Apple's dominance in the smartphone market. Apple tried to get the case dismissed. In June 2025, the court refused. The case is moving toward trial. And in Europe, Apple has been hit repeatedly under the EU's Digital Markets Act, the landmark regulation that designates the largest tech platforms as gatekeepers and imposes specific obligations about interoperability, App Store competition, and default settings. The DMA's fines can reach 10% of global annual turnover. For Apple, that means fines potentially in the tens of billions. Apple's services revenue, the business line that Wall Street valued most highly and used to justify Apple's stock premium, is under direct legal assault from multiple directions at once. Meta is dealing with its own version of this reckoning. For years, the FTC argued that Meta had illegally maintained its social networking monopoly by acquiring Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014, specifically to neutralize competitive threats before they could challenge Facebook. The FTC's original case was dismissed in November 2025 when a judge ruled that Meta did not hold monopoly power when TikTok and YouTube were included in the relevant market definition. Meta exhaled, but then the FTC appealed the dismissal in January 2026. The case is alive again. And in Europe, Meta is facing scrutiny over how it integrates AI features across WhatsApp. Regulators examining whether Meta's scale gives it an anti-competitive advantage in deploying AI that smaller companies cannot match. The DMA's architecture is specifically designed to prevent the AI race from becoming another chapter in the same monopolization story that the social media era produced. Amazon has a trial date on the FTC's antitrust case targeting its e-commerce dominance, scheduled for late 2026. The FTC's case focuses on Amazon's alleged monopoly in the online superstore market, its use of the buy box algorithm, its treatment of third-party sellers, and its Project Nessie pricing system, which the FTC alleges was used to artificially inflate prices across the internet by coordinating with competitor pricing algorithms. Amazon is the infrastructure of e-boulettes. Commerce the way Google is the infrastructure of search. The question regulators are asking is the same one. Did it get there through superior products and genuine competition, or through a systematic strategy of using its platform dominance to penalize rivals and lock in market share in ways that no smaller company could survive? And then there is Microsoft, which has managed for years to operate somewhat under the regulatory radar compared to Google, Apple, Meta, and Amazon. That period is ending. The FTC launched a sweeping antitrust investigation into Microsoft's Azure cloud business, its enterprise software licensing practices, its bundling of Copilot AI across its product suite, and the deepening relationship with OpenAI. The probe is examining whether Microsoft uses its enterprise software dominance, the fact that most large organizations run on Microsoft 365, Teams, Azure, and a dozen other Microsoft products, to steer customers toward its AI products in ways that make it prohibitively expensive to choose competitors. When your entire company already runs on Microsoft infrastructure and Microsoft bundles its AI Copilot into that infrastructure at no additional visible cost, the question regulators are asking is whether any competitor AI product can realistically win that customer's business regardless of quality. Legal analysts are describing this as the most significant antitrust challenge for Microsoft since the landmark 2001 settlement that ended the browser wars. Beyond the individual company cases, there is a structural shift happening at the regulatory level that explains why 2026 feels different from every previous year of tech antitrust enforcement. For decades, regulators applied competition law to tech using frameworks designed for industrial-era monopolies, asking whether prices were too high, whether output was restricted, whether consumers were being directly harmed in ways that could be measured in dollars. Those frameworks were badly suited to platforms where the product was free and the true price was data, attention, and competitive lockout. Courts consistently ruled in the company's favor because the traditional tools did not fit. The new framework that regulators on both sides of the Atlantic are now operating under focuses on market structure and ecosystem control rather than consumer prices. The EU's Digital Markets Act does not ask whether consumers are paying too much. It asks whether the companies designated as gatekeepers are operating their platforms in ways that give themselves structural advantages over any business that depends on those platforms. It is a fundamental redesign of how competition law applies to the digital economy, and it took effect with full enforceability in 2024. American regulators, watching Europe move, have updated their own enforcement theories accordingly. The cases, the DOJ and FTC are now pursuing use updated legal arguments about the role of data, distribution, and ecosystem lock-in that the previous generation of antitrust cases did not address. The deeper fear inside these companies, the thing that does not show up directly in earnings calls but drives the massive lobbying, spending, and the aggressive legal strategies, is not that they will lose a single case. It is that the entire model breaks. Google's business is predicated on being the default. Apple's business is predicated on the closed ecosystem. Meta's business is predicated on network effects that come from scale. Amazon's business is predicated on being the platform that every seller needs to be on. Microsoft's business is predicated on enterprise lock-in. Every one of those structural advantages is now under simultaneous legal attack. If the courts and regulators succeed, not completely, but meaningfully, in breaking up the default arrangements, opening the ecosystems, forcing data sharing, and eliminating exclusive distribution deals, then the economic logic that made these companies worth trillions of dollars becomes less certain. There is one more factor that makes 2026 different from every previous year, and it is artificial intelligence. The AI revolution is not just a new technology these companies are adding to their existing businesses. It is a potential restructuring of the entire digital economy. The companies that control AI infrastructure, the models, the compute, the data, and the distribution channels will potentially hold the same kind of dominance in the next 20 years that Google held in search for the last 20. Regulators know this. The FTC's investigation into Microsoft and OpenAI, the EU's scrutiny of Meta's AI deployments, the DOJ's focus on how Google's AI products interact with its search monopoly, all of these are attempts to prevent the AI era from simply reproducing the same winner-take-all dynamics that produced the current monopoly problem in a new and even more powerful form. The companies are not passive in this fight. They are spending at scales that would have seemed impossible a decade ago on lobbying, on legal challenges, on regulatory affairs, on public relations. Google has thousands of lawyers working on its antitrust defense. Apple has deployed the same aggressive legal strategy it uses in every domain, delay, appeal, challenge jurisdiction, contest every factual finding. Microsoft spent years cultivating a reputation as the reformed tech company, the one that learned its lesson from 2001, the responsible partner of government. That reputation is now being tested by the same pressures that are closing in on the others. The era where big tech could grow without limit, acquire without consequence, and build walled gardens without legal challenge is ending. It is not ending quickly. These are slow, grinding legal processes that will take years to fully resolve. But the direction is clear. The companies that built their empires on the assumption that governments would never seriously challenge their structures are now living in the world where governments are doing exactly that. That is the real reason they are terrified. Not because they will necessarily lose, but because they know for the first time that they genuinely might.